faithfully delivering value by interpreting great books from around the world. Hello, this is Sally talking books. Today I'm going to interpret this book for you called Laëtitia or the End of Humanity. This book is hailed as the modern-day Les Misérables. Its protagonist, Letizia, is a waitress in France. In 1911, at just 18 years old, she was raped, dismembered, and her body dumped in two ponds 50 kilometers apart in Nantes, western France. This horrific crime shocked the nation and intermittently dominated French news headlines for half a year. When Letizia's fate was unknown, people took to the streets to pray for her. And when the case was solved, then French President Nicolas Sarkozy seized the chance to blame the judiciary for inadequate enforcement, triggering an unprecedented strike by French judges. The author of this book, Ivan Jablonka, is a French historian and writer, and also a father of three. He found that in this news coverage, people focus too much on the murderer and the sensational killing details, with no one truly caring behind the cold news headlines. Who exactly was Letizia and what did she endure? So, Jablonka spent 2 years conducting interviews and investigations to reconstruct Letizia's life. He discovered that this tragedy was by no means an isolated incident unrelated to most people. This white girl's life can be seen as a microcosm of issues in France and even globally. As a woman, her entire life was overshadowed by male violence. Letizia, her mother, and her sister all suffered long-term male violence and assault. This violence from birth eroded her life, leading her step by step toward death. Jablonka wrote this book hoping that Letitia's story could help people confront the plight of the vulnerable and reduce the occurrence of tragedies. Perhaps he believes that if we no longer face these tragedies head on, we'll face not just Letizia's personal death, but the end of humanity itself. The book was published in 2016 and was the only nonfiction work shortlisted for France's most prestigious literary award, the Goncourt Prize. After publication, the author Jablonka received many letters from female readers. They told him, "I am Letizia, living the same life as her, feeling like I've met her before." How did Letizia's tragedy happen? Author Jablonka says her death began from birth. On May 4th, 1992, Letizia and her twin sister Jessica were born in Nantes, the largest city in western France. Their mother was 24 years old at the time and worked as a maintenance worker at a school. Their father was 25 years old and worked as a waiter as he had violent tendencies and was an alcoholic. In the twins' second year, their parents divorced. That after the divorce, the father often returned to their home and, when drunk, would unleash violence. Once, when Jessica was still a baby, she cried because her diaper was dirty. Her father grabbed her angrily, threw her. She flew over the living room coffee table and was caught by the family's German shepherd. Another time, on a third-floor balcony, the father grabbed little Letizia by her overalls, dangling her in midair, threatening to drop her if anyone approached. And Jessica could only cling to her mother's leg, wailing loudly. The biggest victim of domestic violence was their mother. One day when Letizia was 3, the father forced the mother to undress, stuffed a rag in her mouth, threatened her with scissors, raped her, and left a 3-centimeter knife wound on her arm. A week later, he tried to do it again, but it ended with the mother hiding in the bathroom and screaming for help. For this, the father was sentenced to 5 years in prison. And the mother suffered a nervous breakdown, needing psychiatric hospital treatment. It could be said she was already dead spiritually. France is one of the world's most developed democratic countries and one of the highest in women's status. However, what happened to Letizia and her mother is not uncommon in France. In 2000, a nationwide survey in France found that in sexual assault cases against women, half of the perpetrators were partners or ex-partners, but these victims rarely took the perpetrators to court. This doesn't just happen in the lower classes, it's also common among the elite. It wasn't until the early 1990s that countries like France and Switzerland passed laws allowing women to sue their spouses for sexual violence. A frightening father and a terrified mother made up the twins' childhood memories. In the court trial after Letizia's death, the murderer recalled taking the girl to a bar, getting into a quarrel and fight with someone, and the girl crying in fear. At this point, he said to the girl's father in the plaintiff's seat, "I'm sorry, sir, but he told me this scene reminded him of his own childhood." Psychologists have observed that children who witness domestic violence often develop these manifestations: anxiety or aggression, and neurosis, post-traumatic stress disorder, and language learning deficits, with vulnerability being the most common and profound trait. After their father was imprisoned, the twins lived with their mother. When angry, she doused them with cold water. When misbehaving, they'd be spanked with a wooden spoon. During their mother's hospitalizations, they'd stay at their grandmother's house for short periods, the sisters. At age 8, their father was released from prison and took custody. Now reformed, their father Frank found work as a truck driver, rented a decent home, hoping to care for them properly. With limited energy, the sisters were unsupervised during days. Constant trauma and instability caused severe learning delays. At 8, the Perot sisters had cognitive abilities of 5-year-olds, couldn't read, write, or do arithmetic. Since age 5, child welfare agencies monitored them, providing open environment educational support, meaning regular home visits, until they turned 8. Judicious and decisive, the juvenile judge deemed their father incapable of raising them. So the judge issued a temporary placement order, sending them to the Department of Child Social Services. For the next 5 years, the sisters lived at a village children's shelter housing abandoned kids. Yet, this period became their sweetest childhood memory. Here they first tasted sweetened milk. Staff remembered the sisters as always friendly and resilient, poor academically but never lazy. As the girls grew, they needed independent space, separate bedrooms, and studies. So at 13, Child Services arranged foster care with the Patron couple. Mr. Patron was then 55, having worked as a boiler operator and secretary with midlife unemployment. At 45, he'd become a family support worker. This job was paid by the departmental council. Their task was to foster children, ensuring their healthy and safe development. The patrons took in 6 children, including the Perot twins, plus 55 others for short-term stays. They qualified as foster parents due to their detached house, stable family, lower middle-class career, and emphasis on children's education. The couple had 3 children, built a new house beside theirs for foster kids, providing spacious living. Initially, the sisters found their dream life with the patrons. They nicknamed their foster parents Mimi and Wolfie. The foster parents took them everywhere: gatherings, trips, camping, skiing, birthdays, all shared experiences. They grew close, even sitting on foster father's lap to chat at 13 or 14. The patrons gave proper education: polite speech, table setting, laundry, early bedtime. Though the twins struggled with math and language, Madame Patron, a retired teacher, checked homework and assigned extra exercises. The couple cared more about the girls' studies than most parents would. So, yet beneath this harmony, problems emerged. Mr. Patron was highly controlling, issuing orders, forbidding interruptions, with his wife fully compliant. Micromanaged the twins, checking homework, grades, spending, banning solo outings. When Letizia was with her boyfriend, foster father would harass with calls. Late returns meant motorcycle confiscation. He strictly controlled contact with their biological father, too. Every call with their father was on speakerphone, with patron listening. Monthly visits required return by 6 p.m. Once during heavy snow, roads closed, the twins asked to stay overnight, but patron refused. Ultimately, gendarmes escorted them to a shelter for the night. That control wasn't the real issue. The real harm to the twins came from their foster father's sexual abuse. It wasn't until after Letizia was murdered that Jessica spoke about her experiences at the patrons. From age 14, the foster father began frequent sexual assaults. Whether in front of the TV, on the sofa, or when his wife was out, he touched the girl's private parts. At first, Jessica resisted, saying, "Do this to your wife. I'm not your wife." But her resistance didn't work. This continued for 4 years. Actually, Patron was notorious since youth for womanizing. Only later did people learn he'd abused girls since his first foster child. That girl recalled enduring similar harassment since age 11. After Letizia's death, her friend told reporters she too admitted harassment by their foster father, but unlike her sister, she didn't let him succeed. So didn't the departmental council supervise Patron? Actually, they did, but it was very lax. They arranged monthly follow-ups, but with limited staff, caseworkers couldn't investigate deeply. Sometimes they seemed happy, other times they seemed overly controlled, yet abuse went undetected, though chances to report existed. Once, a friend visiting Letizia was harassed by Patron. Learning the twins endured this, she and Letizia planned to report him. But on the day, Letizia didn't show, so her friend filed the report alone. This report went to the departmental council. Then Child Services interviewed the three girls, but the parole sisters denied harassment. They met Patron too. He furiously denied everything, so the matter was dropped. The twins' silence is understandable. The accuser was just a visitor with nothing to lose. But the Perot sisters? This was their first stable home. They didn't want to lose it. After Letizia died, Jessica told the author she endured the abuse to trade her body for a stable home and scraps of affection. She said, "To be loved, I had to endure this." Madame Patron was unaware of the prolonged abuse. Even after accidentally discovering clues, she chose to help her husband attack the girl who spoke the truth. For example, in 2003, when the first foster girl was abused, she recorded everything in a notebook. When Patron found the notebook, he called her a liar. Madame Patron demanded an apology, threatening to send her to another family. It ended with the girl tearfully promising never to do it again. Later, their own daughter hinted to Madame Patron about Jessica's relations with her father, but she refused to believe it, just excluding Jessica from family outings. And after Letizia's death, 5 girls sued Patron. Madame Patron still insisted they lied until the judge's verdict. Then she finally said, "My dear old man, you shouldn't have, you should have watched your hands. This could have unfolded differently." For instance, after receiving complaints, the council could have isolated the girls for thorough investigation. So, after all, the council employed Patron, but ultimately, escaping abuse depended on the twins themselves. They studied relentlessly to gain freedom through employment. After basic education, they enrolled in vocational school for professional certificates to secure jobs. Jessica chose cooking, Letizia hospitality. Choices were scarce for underprivileged youth. From primary to high school, they attended support-focused institutions. Here, education aimed not for excellence but basic employability. Their educational path destined them for low-wage, grueling, undervalued work. Their vocational school offered cooking, hospitality, and auto repair training. Students here were often silent, working dawn to dusk, serving rural and small-town communities. Compared to affluent or working-class youth, they were humble lights, society's marginals. Honestly, having a job was already quite good. The Twins region had high unemployment. Among 16 to 24-year-olds, 30% were jobless. At 18, Letizia got a restaurant internship, thrilled to have income and social life. By then, she'd grown strikingly beautiful. 1.64 meters tall, 46 kilograms, slender and well proportioned. She had chestnut brown hair and hazel eyes. To those around her, she was a pretty, smiling girl who loved makeup and fashion, with many suitors. Letizia saw freedom's dawn, making her increasingly resent her foster home. Tatron once crushed one of her romances. To retaliate, she immediately took long trips with other boys to avoid returning home. 6 months before her murder, she applied for work dormitory but was rejected. Jessica wasn't as rebellious. She felt living there was fine. This distanced the sisters somewhat. For Letizia, life became a dilemma. Leaving meant abandoning her twin. Staying meant enduring patrons' control and harassment. Plus, she lacked resources to leave. In this situation, she grew increasingly despondent. Like most girls her age, Letizia loved TV and Facebook, documenting her life and moods there. The author found her Facebook showed deepening unhappiness starting summer 2010. She repeatedly told friends she wanted to escape the foster home. After Letizia's death, 3 suicide notes were found in her room. In them, she bid farewell to loved ones and arranged her belongings. Deciding to die seemed her only escape from that situation. It was in this extreme despair that Letizia met her murderer. January 18, 2011, the day Tony Malin killed her, was chaotic for Letizia. That afternoon, she slept with her boyfriend's best friend. Upset, she drank heavily and walked alone on the beach. Just then, she encountered Malhan, 1.85 meters tall and powerfully built. That day, wearing a leather jacket and hoodie, like Letizia, he came from society's bottom, a shattered family. Born in 1979, Malhan's family, like the Perot twins, was filled with violence and chaos. Malhan's mother was raped by her own father at 15. Bearing his half-brother, incest formed his family, making all social rules seem worthless. She later married a violent man and had Malhan. His biological father beat the children and sexually harassed his daughter. Unable to endure it, Malhan's mother fled and remarried. After her remarriage, Malhan displayed the same violent traits as his father. Hating his stepfather, he'd lock himself in bathrooms, punch walls, and hit other children. Even in 5th grade, he slashed his teacher with a dagger. Finally, sent to special education school, he escaped, walking home bleeding for a day, only to be rejected by his mother, worsening his behavior. From 16, he became a notorious troublemaker. When killing Letizia at 31, Malhan had 13 prior convictions: repeated theft, inmate gang rape, robbery, and insulting judges. His entire life cycled between special schools, courtrooms, and prisons. In late 2010, Malhan was released again and soon met Letizia. On January 18th afternoon, he'd sold stolen medical equipment and was drinking at a horse racing casino. On the beach near the bar, he spotted Letizia walking alone. He recognized her. They'd talked there the previous summer. Malhan approached and chatted her up. Ah! They drank, smoked his weed and cocaine, took photos when partying, even kissed. Malhan promised to pick her up after work. While waiting, Malhan kept drinking, doing drugs, hitting on other girls, and bought Letizia gloves as a gift. That evening, after picking her up, they went to 2 bars, faithfully delivering value by interpreting great books from around the world. Hello, this is Sally talking books. Today, I'm going to interpret this book for you called Letizia, or The End of Humanity. This book is hailed as the modern-day Les Misérables. Its protagonist, Letizia Perot, is a waitress in France. In 1911, at just 18 years old, she was raped, dismembered, and her body dumped in 2 ponds 50 kilometers apart in Nantes, western France. This horrific crime shocked the nation and intermittently dominated French news headlines for half a year. When Letizia's fate was unknown, people took to the streets to pray for her. And when the case was solved, Then French President Nicolas Sarkozy seized the chance to blame the judiciary for inadequate enforcement, triggering an unprecedented strike by French judges. The author of this book, Ivan Jablonka, is a French historian and writer, and also a father of three. And he found that in this news coverage, people focused too much on the murderer and the sensational killing details, with no one truly caring. Behind the cold news headlines, who exactly was Letizia and what did she endure? So, Jablonka spent 2 years conducting interviews and investigations to reconstruct Letitia's life. And she discovered that this tragedy was by no means an isolated incident unrelated to most people. This white girl's life can be seen as a microcosm of issues in France and even globally. As a woman, her entire life was overshadowed by male violence. Letizia, her mother, and her sister all suffered long-term male violence and assault. This violence from birth eroded her life, leading her step by step toward death. Jablonka wrote this book hoping that Letizia's story could help people confront the plight of the vulnerable and reduce the occurrence of tragedies. Perhaps he believes that if we no longer face these tragedies head on, we'll face not just Letizia's personal death, but the end of humanity itself. The book was published in 2016 and was the only nonfiction work shortlisted for France's most prestigious literary award, the Goncourt Prize. After publication, the author Jablonka received many letters from female readers. They told him, "I am Letizia, living the same life as her, feeling like I've met her before." How did Letizia's tragedy happen? Third is Death's Call. Before meeting Mailhan, Letizia already had suicidal thoughts. Her walking into the lion's den carried a hint of suicide. Ultimately, childhood violence made her defenses collapse, connecting predator and prey. Both killer and victim came from chaotic white underclass worlds where upward nobility was blocked, each generation inheriting tragedy. Some sank like Mailhan, others climbed like Letizia, yet the former destroyed the latter. The story, hearing this, you might sigh deeply over Letizia's ordeal. If she hadn't been born into that family, had better foster parents, or avoided the beach that day, she might be alive, but reality permits no what-ifs. Worse, agencies meant to protect her failed, while politicians turned her death into a publicity stunt. After her family reported her missing, the case gained national attention. 6 days later, 300-plus people marched where she vanished, making headlines. Next day, President Sarkozy gave speeches and twice received the patrons at Élysée Palace. The author notes Sarkozy exploited news events by scapegoating others to divert public fury, or cozying up to victims' families for popularity, but neither tactic worked this time. First, he publicly blamed law enforcement on TV. Judges are responsible. They failed to ensure monitoring. In France, ex-convicts face two-tier monitoring. Sentence enforcement judges deciding parole or ankle monitors. Under the sentence enforcement judges, there's an agency called Probation and Social Reintegration Service, responsible for daily monitoring of prisoners during sentences and those in open environments. Sarkozy was accusing the judges of negligence for letting someone like Mailhan, with a serious criminal record, roam free to reoffend. But this accusation infuriated judges nationwide. Judges argued that economic policy failures by the administration, reducing public funding, caused understaffing, overwork, and systemic collapse. For example, courts that needed 5 judges now had 3, all overwhelmed, especially the probation service. Nationally, 3,000 staff faced 170,000 cases. In Letizia's region, each monitored 300 offenders, an impossible task. 6 months before the incident, the agency director warned superiors about dysfunctional operations, but received no response. Thus, they could only prioritize monitoring based on offenders' latest crime severity. Coincidentally, Mailhan's last conviction in 2010 was for insulting a judge. This was considered minor compared to murder, theft, or even traffic offenses, so he was deemed low priority, slipping through the cracks. This is why law enforcement failed to contain him. By publicly blaming judges, Sarkozy turned these overworked officials into perceived accomplices. The presiding judge of this case, he later recalled that during Sarkozy's TV address, he was exhaustedly searching for Letitia's body. After days without sleep, hearing such accusations, this nearly 50-year-old man wept before the TV. The day after Sarkozy's speech, judges in the crime cities struck for a full week. Unprecedented. Solidarity spread nationwide like wildfire. In a closed-door meeting at Paris courthouse, 95% voted to strike. Nationally, 195 courtrooms across 16 jurisdictions joined, delaying all non-urgent cases. This massive strike transformed a social news story into a national crisis. Ultimately, the president stopped pursuing judges and dismissed the head of the Probation and Social Reintegration Service. A regional department director was removed, closing the matter. This low-level civil servant became the scapegoat for the entire affair. Sarkozy formed a mutually beneficial alliance, blaming judges while courting the patrons as victim representatives. After Letizia's death, the patrons positioned themselves as her spokespeople, hanging "Justice for Letizia" signs at home. They even wore t-shirts with the slogan, "With patron," shouting at cameras, "Stop freeing sex offenders! Give them the death penalty!" Faithfully delivering value by interpreting great books from around the world. Hello, this is Sally talking books. Today I'll interpret Letizia or the End of Humanity for you. This book is hailed as the modern-day Les Misérables. Its protagonist, Letizia Perrault, was a French waitress. In 2011, at just 18, she was raped, dismembered, and dumped in two ponds 50 kilometers apart near Mantes, a crime that shocked France and dominated headlines for half a year. When her fate was unknown, people marched in prayer for her. When solved, President Sarkozy blamed judicial failures, triggering France's first ever judge strike. Author Yvon Jablonka is a French historian, writer, and father of three. He found media focused excessively on the killer and gruesome details, ignoring the real person behind cold headlines. Who was Letizia? What did she endure? So Jablonka spent 2 years investigating to reconstruct her life. And he discovered this wasn't an isolated tragedy, but one reflecting wider societal failures. This white girl's life became a microcosm of France's and the world's problems. As a woman, her life was overshadowed by male violence. Letizia, her mother, and sister all suffered long-term abuse. This violence from birth eroded her life, leading her step by step toward death. Jablonka wrote this book hoping that Letitia's story could help people confront the plight of the vulnerable and reduce the occurrence of tragedies. Perhaps he believes that if we no longer face these tragedies head on, we'll face not just Letizia's personal death, but the end of humanity itself. Published in 2016, it was the only nonfiction work shortlisted for France's most prestigious literary award, the Goncourt Prize. After publication, author Jablonka received many letters from female readers. They told him, "I am Letizia, living her life, feeling like I've known her forever." How did Letizia's tragedy unfold? Author Jablonka says her death began at birth.